given most of these people are individuals that I have either interacted with or engaged significantly with over the last couple of years, they've seen a lot of the fire. I think we're past that into much cooler territory now. So really looking forward to having this conversation.
Indeed, indeed. So I'm just going to start out by saying Deepa is no stranger, I think, to anyone in this room if they've been here longer for a day, or in fact, as she says, if they're in the virtual asset space. Now, I have to read out her official title because I think Deepa wears many hats, but she is the Managing Director and Vice Chairperson of VARA, amongst many other things. And I scoured through the podcast, numerous articles she's been quoted in, and I was looking for something that kind of summed up what Deepa had done for the space in the last, I'd say, 18 months or so, and I couldn't find one particular thing. So I said, let's make our own today. As many of you know, I've had the pleasure and joy of working with Deepa and the rest of the team for the last 2.5 years on the VAR regulations. And I think fire comes to mind. Lots of things come to mind when we talk about where we've come from. And as it's my birthday today, and thanks very much. So it's indeed a pleasure to be up here on my birthday with Deepa. I think it's a time of reflection. And so before we start this tokenization, maybe the future, where we've come from, I'd like to actually reflect and maybe talk about where we've come from. You are part of the D33 agenda. You are someone who was very involved with the instrumental parts of bringing VARA to life, literally. Where is it, do you think, we've come to? I know I want to eventually segue into where I think the future VARA is going to, but maybe talk a little bit about the past, because when people came to me and they said, you're going to be writing these regulations, are you sure you want to be involved with that? That seems a little crazy. I'm sure you must have been kind of through lots of emotions, lots of times, and been said lots of things about, are you crazy? Do you think this is going to work? Is it something that's maybe a trial and error? Maybe it's smoke and mirrors, just a little PR? What do you think Dubai was thinking when they came up with Law Number 4 of 2022?
Firstly, beyond Kristi's birthday today, she's also been very recently anointed as one of the top 10 lawyers across Asia, and something that you guys probably already know. So if she's still sitting here 2 years out from having done the job that she has, then at least the rest of the world's seeing some value in it, right? So we've gotten to a place where we've created collectively, and a lot of you have been involved in that process as well, collectively created a framework that we can build on together, right? That is not what we imagined we would be doing. As we were all sitting through a COVID era, 2019, 2020, the world was in a very different place than it is today, just 4 years out from there. And most of the traditional economy levers had pretty much failed, right? Failed to protect either the people, the economies, and or businesses, right, across the world. And so Dubai didn't come from a very different place from anywhere else that perhaps many of you have come from here today to join us as well. And remember that there was this economy that was largely driven by tourism, events and entertainment, and of course trade, all three of which completely came to a standstill at that time. So when you've got a region that is not only very proactive about the future and very focused on getting us out of a hole, but also top-down, very directional, visionary on what that future could look like, that may be dramatically different from what past brought us here, right? What got us here is not going to get you there. That's very much the ethos of Dubai. And that's really how we came about, we collectively. And I say VARA not just as a regulator, but VARA the ecosystem that you all belong to. Many of the people that worked with us building this, in fact, some of them, in fact, in the audience as well, you've got Henson Orser, who used to be very much part of VARA, that have been part of creating this reality that is very much part of the future of what finance is going to be, to perhaps what the traditional finance industry is recognizing as a reality that they have to accept, adopt, and grow with us, right? So the reality of VARA came up from there to say, if we had to create this future for the rest of the world, what should that look like? Should we come up with rules that somebody else has already built and perhaps built on it, which is where we started, but then quickly realized nobody does have rules around it, and we've got to build it from scratch with yourselves. And you have all contributed to that exercise. As we go through it, we also recognize that it's not going to be a static rule set. It's something that has to evolve with the times, and with you at the fore of it. Unless you want to be regulated, there is nothing that can be done to bring regulations to very much the core of what that future, a sustainable future, looks like, right? So that was really where we started. Where we are today, I think you should be answering that more than me. Where do you think we are today, right?
I think let's get on to that. So let's talk about tokenization. There's been a lot about tokenization. There's been a lot of panels about it. I think there's been a lot of curiosity around it, and some are saying that it may be the rise, is the most exciting trend in finance and technology. I think that's been said a lot this week. We're seeing many things like funds, real estate, commodities, fine art, looking to be tokenized. Some already claiming they are being tokenized. I guess the question I have for you, Deepa, is what do you see and how do you see tokenization evolving in the UAE? Where are we at this point in juncture?
Yeah, so tokenization, and you've probably experienced this way more than we have, but there's everybody that wants to tokenize something or the other, right? So there is the real world asset tokenization, which is something that we've come out with rules on. You may have read some guidance on it as well. But there's also individuals that constantly are looking to tokenize things that do not have any material value, but it's just a PR stunt. So we've got to draw the distinction between one and the other. And Kristi, you've mentioned a lot about real world assets. So there is of course, real estate, but there is funds and there's traditional finance that is looking to get into that space. And where is Dubai at in its thinking? Real estate is an obvious one as far as we're concerned, because it is very much the core bread and butter of what exists in Dubai. But what is being tokenized today is very different from what regulated tokenization should look like. What do we mean by that, right? When you see a lot of real estate companies in today's market, whether it's in Dubai or the rest of the world, saying they're tokenizing things, they're not necessarily tokenizing ownership of the asset or land rights of the asset, right? It's more like an NFT, if you will. It's just a gimmick in some way, shape, and form to get some level of credibility around their development as opposed to something that is legally regulatable, right? And this is an area that VARA is working on with the relevant authorities in real estate within this region to say, how do you look at ownership of assets? What kind of title deeds are tokenizable? And what part of that equation can VARA regulate, should VARA regulate, versus areas that are traditionally within your turf and your territory in traditional finance? Are you ready to allow for that to happen? So there's one small example of real estate, but the reality is tokenization very much involves the intersection of various different regulators. It can't just be a virtual asset regulator. It has to be the real world asset economy anyway, which is a regulated asset today. So that's the journey that we're going through. We're expecting to create use cases in our midst. And if many of you are already part of that equation dialogue with us here at VARA, we want to have use cases that we can see come to life before we start to write rules around it, because that then serves as the basis for what another country may want to adopt or adapt to what works for their economy and sort of their structure. It doesn't have to be a standardized rule set for everyone, but some kind of framework that can be acceptable to all of the people in the world and then customizable to your jurisdiction's specific requirements. That's the journey we're going through and the dialogue we're having with fellow regulators as well.
Yeah, so Deepa, we've talked about this and you were just alluded to it. Real estate is a very natural fit for tokenization. I think there's a lot of opportunities, so perhaps we can talk about opportunities, but there's also a lot of challenges. So perhaps, maybe let's talk about opportunities first. Where do we see the opportunities? I mean, I guess we can look out the window, we can probably see lots of opportunities, but where do you see really the first, if we're gonna say, if you could say the first 10 projects, what would you say that would look like and how often do we think we're gonna get that off the ground?
Before I go to projects, I'll talk about opportunities, right? So what are we trying to solve for with tokenization of real estate? Fundamentally, from our perspective as a regulator, and perhaps the market has a different view on it, it's to allow for greater participation, right? Today, real estate can only be owned if you have certain number of years of credit history, you're able to actually prove to your banks that you can go and purchase an asset with the ability to repay it, et cetera, et cetera. We've all gone through those from Dubai, from the UAE, have certainly gone through the 2008 crisis in real estate. And so we're very cognizant of not letting some of that reoccur, right? So the ability to fund projects without necessarily having the funds to do so, and committing to a long-term future and investments that do not exist. It's a fiction, right? And that's the reality that we understand. Our regulators, traditional finance regulators, traditional economy regulators, have gone through and do not want reoccurring. So they're obviously concerned about that, and it's our job as the modern economy regulators, new economy regulators, to work with them to come up with ways in which those kind of risks can be avoided, but equally title deeds, fractionalization, how many people can co-own an asset, all those kind of things that the RERA, which is our Real Estate Regulatory Authority, hasn't traditionally ever done. And this is not exclusive to the UAE. It's obviously the same issue with the rest of the world.
Right. We have it in Hong Kong.
Yes, exactly.
We have the same problems in Hong Kong that I think you're finding in everywhere.
In the world. Everywhere in the world. And so the reality is, if the 10 of us around this table cannot co-own an asset, how do you expect to fractionalize it, right? It's just not going to occur. It then becomes a sublet, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the piece that we've got to solve for together, one part. But when we then talk about projects, there's different parts of the real estate chain that can be tokenized. So there's the fundraising part of it versus the asset ownership part of it, and everything in the middle. Each one of them falls under a different spectrum or a different type of regulator. So you talked about funds a little while ago. That's very much a TradFi setup that can be tokenized, can be done. That can be done today, right? As far as our rule set is concerned.
Yes, absolutely.
Ownership is much further down the equation. Right?
And would that go to the challenges? You know, we've talked about the opportunities, we talked about the projects. Challenges? We've mentioned a few. I mean, we've talked about it from a Hong Kong construct. I know we don't have ownership vis-a-vis the title deeds, so you can't fractionalize pieces of paper. Yes. Your register of members for a company can't be done digitally in Hong Kong, so therefore that presents issues around being able to tokenize shares. So I suppose we say it's the same here. I'm assuming it's the same here. Would we say that there's the same or even different challenges here?
There will be different challenges in every geography and every economy you go to, right? That's the challenge that we would have here. Ownership, obviously, the number of people that can, and what can get flipped around, et cetera. When can you sell? All those kind of things that are limited today until the title deed, the asset is complete, and then transferred over to you. So if you start to invest in tokenizing a fund to build a real estate project, very different from owning the asset at the end, and when do you get the access to the title deed as a single owner, and thereafter as multiple owners. So those are all challenges we've got to address. That's exclusive to our jurisdiction. Some parts of that may be common to yours and to some of the other jurisdictions that you guys come from, but you've got to therefore, and this goes back to the point I was making, you can have a guidelines, you can have a framework, but not all the issues that you're trying to solve for as a government for your people are the same. And you're therefore going to have to customize it based on the nuances of your specific economy, right? How do you create that commonality of rule set? And that's really, I mean, this is real estate. You have the same thing in healthcare, right?
Right.
You've got it in pretty much every asset class. People have been talking a lot about tokenizing identities in order for you to be able to transfer your insurance to different markets, etc. A lot of people went through huge amounts of strife during COVID. When you were traveling, you didn't necessarily have all of your data, documents, etc. with you, and couldn't get access to healthcare in many parts of the world. How do you allow for that to not happen ever again? So the ability of your identity to travel with you, the passportability of that identity in a tokenized format, is something that some of you have come to us to discuss. So there are very many different versions, social enterprise as well as practical private sector enterprise, that we can solve for. We've just got to be able to prioritize it and identify which is the largest sort of use case that is relevant to all of you, that we solve for that first and go on along that journey. So I would almost encourage more people to come up with real practical use cases that we can create rules around and work to, as opposed to try and solve for all of the problems at one shot. It's just not going to happen.
Before we move on to regulation, do we think there are any low-hanging fruit here?
Aren't they all?
I'm not sure. I would say.
So many. I mean, look at the number of people around
Well, I mean,
here.
the number of people here, but I think that some projects probably are more low-hanging fruit than others, perhaps.
Give me an example of what you consider.
Well, let me put it this way. I think real estate, any jurisdiction has multiple issues. You've got to have government involvement. There's a lot of regulation required, maybe even some changes in law, which in many countries, luckily here, I wouldn't say a quick process, but doable process. Hong Kong, well, let's try to figure out how to do it another way. It's slightly longer process to getting it changed. So I think real estate probably is one that's a lot further off. I think we've seen tokenization of funds. I'm thinking commodities, maybe. I mean, Dubai has a lot of commodity space.
So I would say, if you're saying in our jurisdiction, what are the ones that are most likely to take off, those would be
Or go to market first. Which one do you think we can get to market
those would be the
first?
three. I would say real estate, as you rightly pointed out, funds and commodities, right? But I say that not because it's the easiest. It is the one that we're the most able to execute on because it's some of the largest portions of our economy are driven by those, right? Trade routes, so any of the trade transactions, etc. Those would be another one that I would look at. So DP World and their logistics network, those would be another one that I would look at. So those would be four that we could very credibly have a use case around that the rest of the world would see us as being experts in the space to be able to advise on, right? If we had to pick an industry that doesn't kind of exist here or is not as mature here, we would not be in the best place to make a case of it. So that's the only reason I would say that. But I would say, there should be others that every other jurisdiction where it is your sense of expertise, if they develop it, it gives us a lot more commonality to be able to share, transfer, passport our learnings, right?
So I think the point, if you're going to take anything home today, point to note, it's not because it's the easiest, it's because it's the most doable. I think that's quotable there because that's really important when you start to think about some of these projects that we look at for VARA and VARA starts to look at. It's not because they're easy, it's because it's really a will to get it to market. So I think that's a really good point.
I just think that's a very Dubai DNA, UAE DNA, right? So it's not, everything is going to be complicated. But if you sit around saying no before you can say yes, or just say, oh, the easiest thing to do is not regulate because I just don't know how to, or I can pretend you don't exist, that's not going to fly, right? It's just not going to fly. I mean, you wouldn't, none of the people that live in Dubai would have survived this long here if they didn't get that. That's very much part of the ethos of the nation.
There's a lot of nodding heads.
It's
that's
very
why I'm
much,
a bit chuckling. There's a lot of, yes, a lot of nodding heads here. Well, which leads us into a great place to talk about regulation. VARA's role here. Regulation plays obviously a pivotal role in the success of tokenization, no doubt. To that end, VARA is working to create a regulatory environment, we know that, to provide the necessary guardrails whilst promoting innovation. What would some of these be? I know some of the guardrails that we look at, obviously consumer protection, AML, KYC, CFT. What are the other things? Is there any other things you think that VARA is looking at to be a pivotal role? What needs to change? Again, what needs to be the guardrail? What are some of the things that you need to push out there? I know from the fact of what you tell us, sometimes what you need to push along the agenda, but I'm curious, for the first time, just so you know, it's like great to be in this position. I get to ask Deepa questions instead of Deepa saying, "Go find me some answers for these things, Kristi." So it's a birthday wish indeed, birthday present indeed today. So sorry, Deepa, but like I said, where do you think VARA is playing a pivotal role, and how do you think VARA will actually help change this space in virtual assets vis-a-vis tokenization, real estate, commodities, etc.?
Yeah. Look, what I'll say is, 2 years ago, we were all in a very different world, right? Where some basics, like the points you mentioned, consumer protection, AML, KYC, were taken as not understood by the providers of a service, and the need for a regulator to protect the market. And as a consequence, you needed to play that sort of safeguarding role, right? I think we're in a very different level of maturity, both as regulators and as industry, where industry is participating, asking to be regulated, asking to be made credible, and lend itself sort of a token of, here's a Scout's Honor, the kind of badge. People can not only trust you, but trust you to do the right thing, that you will be responsible participants. And everyone that we've interacted with so far, a few bad actors do not make the whole pie. And that's really very much something that we find important, we as a regulator find important, that the market is able to understand, respect, and appreciate. And that's something that we're very committed to doing. So to that extent, these type of areas where there are use cases that can be brought to market effectively, innovation can be fostered, but in a way in which people also understand it's coming up just not because it's the coolest new thing to do and it's, it's just there to be done, but it's because there is really a market need that they're trying to solve for. So what are those cases that we can bring to bear, right? And so I would say areas that you feel are under-addressed, untapped, or where you've dealt with regulators in other jurisdictions that have not been able to solve for, and there is a use case, even if it is not in our own, what can we work on together where you can take that message across to people that really need it, unbanked and the underbanked population, that you've all been introduced to this industry, decided to become part of it to service that community, right? And as a consequence, you're obviously wedded to ensuring their interests are always protected. Since we're on the same page here and we don't have to reinvent the wheel on that, how can we communicate that message in a more credible fashion? If you can bring in more of those kind of use cases, credibility to the equation, and please read the rule books before you come and speak to VARA, right? We're not creating your business for you. You're the thinkers, right? You're the doers. We're there to help you get there in the most credible fashion possible.
This brings me to a point about 2.5 years. The first time we arrived on I think it was a public holiday, VARA, we had a meeting with them for the first time, and I think Amar had just joined the firm. Come to this meeting, and I think you aptly mentioned it. I'm going to ask you, you mentioned that we're building a wall a bit at the moment, and we're going to see how the market reacts. And if we're able to, we're going to start to take the bricks down from these walls one by one. Do you think we're at a point now, just only 2.5 years on, maybe 2 years actually, 18 months since we've had the regulations out, where are we in the kind of breaking down of the wall? Are we really able to, I mean, Dubai's come off the grey list for FATF, which is a very important part to this ecosystem. But just maybe you could comment on the breaking down of the wall and where we're at in that piece and regulation and market participation behavior.
So one, I'm going to say, yes, we're way further forward than we imagined we would be, right? And that goes for everyone collectively. It's not just a regulator. The regulator can only evolve as fast as the industry. And the industry went through its own sort of turmoil, just timing coincidentally. We just happened to be at that point of disruption where everything crashed together. So one could look back and say, gosh, you went and set up a regulator for an industry that actually burnt itself within a year of you being set up. But I think that was the best timing possible because both of us understood the need for each other and the need to collaborate to get to where we are today. Where we are today is higher than where you as an industry have ever been, right, in your past, which says a lot about how much maturity the industry has demonstrated. And we are so much better as a consequence of it. So breaking of that wall was a given. It was going to happen. If we were starting to create silos, we were no better than the traditional economy construct that you were trying to break away from anyway. What you have created for the future is very much part of the vision statement that defined this industry 15 years ago, right? It just hadn't come to bear. And what I will say for that is that taking away one brick at a time, I think we've just exploded. It's not one brick at a time, it's a volcano that just erupted. The whole thing's gone. There wasn't anything left behind, and you can't build a better future than out of rubble. The moment you've got pieces of a brick wall still there, whatever you create will still be a wall. And when you don't have anything and you just have sand, you're left with Dubai, right? You're left with a desert that you build and create what you see around you today. No one would have imagined that 60 years ago. And you've got, pictures of it that are testament to how quickly the city's come up. If anything, your industry represents the DNA of the city. That's the reason you are here, and you should build out of here.
So I'm being told to wrap it up, but I would be remiss without asking you, where do we think the future is? Maybe quick, 1 minute or less. Where do you think we're at? Where do you think the future holds for Dubai in the virtual asset space?
I absolutely think this is going to be the base from where the rest of the world gets serviced in the near term, but from where the rest of the world will seek inspiration and create a better future collectively, so it does truly become a borderless new world, right? I'm looking forward to seeing all of you as very much part of it, right? And see where we build this together. It's not going to be that long. The 18 months that you talked about in our world is an eon, right? We've got all of 6 months to get it done. So let's get there.
So I guess that's a wrap. And Habibi, come to Dubai. Thank you. Thank you, Deepa.
We can open for questions if you can just have one question or two. Sure. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, Deepa, and
Hello.
thanks for the shout out.
No, honestly, right? I see that as a compliment to a regulator. When somebody comes into a regulator, helps set it up, and then says, I'm now going to take that flag onto the industry and build from there, that's commendation enough.
You're nice. Thank you. One thing we worked on and talked about a lot, and I know you're part of global forums of various regulators, and some places like Hong Kong, where Kristi is deeply embedded, are further along in the process of thinking about framework and clarity. How are you thinking about the evolution of equivalence and passportability to these jigsaw puzzle pieces throughout the world of some of these global technology companies?
Fantastic question, and I'm sure it's top of mind for a lot of you that operate out of various different jurisdictions, right? Some level of harmonization, and it's an often confused term. People assume harmonization means exactly the same set of rules everywhere. That's not going to happen. That's a reality because every jurisdiction, as we just discussed, has very specific requirements for their people that they need to solve for, which may not be the same across the world. And as a consequence, having a harmonized set of frameworks or guidances that can sort of direct the thinking that can then be customized to the specific environment that you operate in is an important part. I think we progressed significantly from where we were 2 years ago. And I would say, like you pointed out, Asia is a lot more progressed on it than perhaps the Western economies. MICA is obviously doing a phenomenal job more recently, but remember, they've got 28 states, right? When they've managed to get 28 of them coming together with some kind of common understanding of what that future looks like, that's already an accomplishment. But they're not a regulator. They don't have the ability. They're a policy setting body. They don't have the ability to enforce, which then makes it very fluid. However, Asia doesn't have that problem. So you've got Hong Kong, you've got Japan, very progressive in where it stands today. And that was a revelation to us, only because they're probably one of the most conservative economies from a thinking perspective. If they've seen this as the future and they want to go there, it shows that we're headed in the right direction. The US is a different market altogether, and I think we're going to just park that aside till your elections get over. But I think the rest of the world, certainly across Europe and Asia, we have, as a government, had very strong bilaterals with. They've been talking to us, and where I find a lot of those conversations headed is the realization we may not actually have rules yet, but we want our companies to operate out of your jurisdiction up until such time as our rules are mature enough, the government's accepted it, and we can bring them back, which is a great shout out to where we are at, and also how quickly we can get there, potentially. Did anyone else? Thank you so much, everyone.